"This meeting is for heirs only," the lawyer said, not even looking me in the eye. I stood there for a second, heartbeat steady, briefcase in hand, as my siblings smirked from across the polished mahogany table. They thought this was it, the final act in a play where I was just the forgotten understudy. I stepped forward and laid a thick folder on the table. "Then you must mean the properties I already own," I said, flipping open the deeds one by one. The room froze. They thought they were about to inherit a real estate empire. But while they were busy climbing Dad's crumbling ladder, I had quietly built the foundation underneath it and bought every rung they stood on. I wasn't here for a share of the inheritance. I was here to let them know there's nothing left to inherit. Only consequences. The silence that followed my declaration was thick, so thick it could have been cut with a letter opener. Nathan, my older brother, leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his jaw visibly clenched. Claire, the youngest, blinked at me like I'd grown a second head. The lawyer, Mr. Mathers, cleared his throat awkwardly but said nothing. He wasn't ready for this. None of them were. But me, I'd been ready for this moment for 3 years. Let me rewind. My name is Jillian Graves, middle child of the late Charles Graves real estate tycoon, empire builder, and, if I'm being honest, a man who knew how to build skyscrapers better than he knew how to raise a daughter. Growing up, Nathan was the golden boy. He played golf with Dad's partners by the time he turned 16, interned at the company every summer, and could recite quarterly revenue reports like bedtime stories. Claire. She was the social butterfly, charming, manipulative when needed, always at Dad's charity events, schmoozing donors and future clients. Dad adored them both in his own transactional way. And me, I was the kid who didn't want to play by the family rulebook. I chose finance over real estate, algorithms over architectural blueprints. I loved numbers, but I didn't love being told where I belonged. I remember the day I told Dad I didn't want to work at Graves Holdings. He didn't yell. That would have been too emotional for him. He just looked at me, expression unreadable, and said, "Then you're on your own." And from that day forward, it was subtle at first. Fewer invites to family dinners, ignored group chats, snide remarks about people who abandoned legacy. But it built gradually, like mold under wallpaper. By the time I was 30, I hadn't heard from Nathan or Claire in over a year unless you count passive-aggressive LinkedIn comments. Dad made it clear, in both words and actions, that my departure from the company was a betrayal. He told people at the firm I was off chasing fintech fantasies and that he'd already written off his middle child. His favorite phrase was, "We don't need her. We have legacy. I was legacy. They just didn't see it yet. I took the exile quietly. No dramatic Facebook posts. No family arguments aired at weddings. Instead, I started something of my own, an investment firm called Crescent Oak Capital. Modest at first. 4 employees, an office above a bakery, and a couple of seed clients who trusted my instincts more than my last name. But then came the cracks. 2 years ago, Graves Holdings made a bold expansion into a tech corridor in the city's east side and over-leveraged itself doing it. The market shifted. Rental yields dipped. Suddenly, the empire was stretched thin. My father, too proud to admit weakness, began liquidating assets quietly, and always through third parties. That's when I made my move. You'd be amazed how easy it is to buy up buildings when you wear a different mask. I created shell companies, formed holding groups, funneled capital through Crescent Oak subsidiaries. One by one, the crown jewels of Graves Holdings became mine. I wasn't stealing, I was buying, at full market value, no deception, no threats, just business. And Dad, he never noticed. Or maybe he did too late. I kept my distance, never attended funerals of business rivals, never bumped into them at conferences. I didn't need public recognition. I was building power where it mattered, in ownership, in control. I didn't need the Graves name. The Graves name was about to need me. And now, Here I was, back in the room they once shut me out of. I watched Nathan slowly push back his chair and stand. "This is ridiculous," he snapped, voice low but shaking. "You can't just walk in here with some paperwork and hijack Dad's legacy." I raised an eyebrow. "Hijack, Nathan. Your legacy is in foreclosure. I just gave it a new lease." Claire finally spoke, her voice small but sharp. "You bought everything? How? Why? That's not even legal. I finished for her? It is. And if you don't believe me, Mr. Mathers can explain it all." The lawyer still looked stunned, but he nodded. "I can confirm that the documents Miss Graves provided are legitimate. I've reviewed some of these transactions myself during due diligence phases." Nathan scoffed, turning to him. "Why the hell would Dad ever sell those properties? They were his crown jewels." "Because," I said quietly, "he was bleeding cash and didn't want you to know. So he sold, quietly, to buyers who looked unthreatening. Buyers like me." Silence again. Not anger. Not yet. Confusion. Loss. They thought they were standing at the summit of a mountain built by our father. They were just now realizing that summit had shifted beneath them and they were standing on my foundation. Claire reached for one of the property deeds and flipped through it. Her hands trembled slightly. "The Westmont Tower, that was Dad's retirement asset. It was," I said, "until it wasn't." Mr. Mathers, clearing his throat again, gestured toward the table. "Shall we proceed with the will?" Nathan didn't sit down. Claire didn't speak. I simply nodded and took my seat. And just like that, the game changed. Mr. Mathers adjusted his glasses and reached for the sealed envelope beside him, the one embossed with my father's signature wax seal. But before he could open it, Nathan spoke again. "No. Wait, we're not glossing over this." His voice was firmer now, louder, trying to reclaim control of the room. He wasn't just speaking to Mr. Mathers, he was speaking to everyone, including himself. The disbelief hadn't worn off yet, but his pride was scrambling to patch the cracks. "I don't believe this. This is a bluff. There's no way Dad sold you anything, let alone our cornerstone properties. He'd rather die than let one of his children, especially you, gut the company." I smiled thinly. And yet, here we are. He did die. And before he did, he sold them. Not to me directly. Of course, that would have ruined the surprise. Nathan turned a deep shade of red, then gestured to Mr. Mathers. "Tell her to leave. She's not part of this family. She's not in the will. This meeting isn't for whatever she is. I'm the one who owns the buildings this family used to brag about." I said calmly, "I suggest you sit down before you say something you can't walk back." Claire, still holding the Westmont Tower deed, looked up from the page. "What's Crescent Oak Capital?" she asked. Her brow furrowed. I leaned back in my chair. "My investment firm. But that's just some boutique outfit. Tiny. You have like 5 employees. 16, actually. And a network of holding companies, offshore investment arms. And yes, plenty of shell corporations, each designed for one thing: acquiring distressed legacy real estate, like Graves Holdings assets." Nathan barked out a dry laugh. "This is a joke?" "No," I said. "This is strategy. Let's rewind again." A little deeper. 2.5 years ago, a flood hit the Eastern Corridor, devastating rental income on Graves's waterfront properties. The company was already stretched thin from overinvestment in the Midtown expansion project, a move Nathan had championed. The board panicked, liquidity dried up, and Graves Holdings proud, stoic. Stubborn Graves needed fast cash. That's when I made my first offer. It came through Harborspan Holdings, a shell company based in Delaware. Clean offer, above market value. A perfect out for a company too proud to admit it was in trouble. Dad bit the bait. From there, it was easy. He didn't know who was behind Harborspan. He didn't know Briarwood Management, or Foxgate Properties, or Kensington Equity, but I did. I built them all paper by paper, layer by layer, with one goal: reclaim the empire that had once cast me out. No vengeance, no blood feud, just cold, clean acquisition. Claire placed the deed down on the table and whispered, "This can't be happening." I turned to her. "I gave you a chance. Claire, 2 years ago. At that gala, I tried to talk to you. You barely looked up from your flute of champagne. I thought you were trying to sell me insurance," she said, exasperated. "No," I replied. "I was trying to offer you an out." Mr. Mathers, perhaps sensing the tension simmering into something dangerous, cleared his throat again and finally opened the will. "I believe Mr. Graves would have wanted us to proceed." "Sure," Nathan muttered, but he stayed standing. Mr. Mathers began to read. "To my son, Nathaniel Graves. I leave the management rights to Graves Midtown Developments and the leasehold holdings therein." I didn't flinch. I knew what was coming. "To my daughter, Claire Graves. I leave the licensing rights to the Graves luxury brand, including its trademarks, image rights, and hospitality marketing division." Both Nathan and Claire looked smug for a second until the lawyer continued. "These assets, however, are contingent on the continued ownership and control of the underlying real estate portfolio." Claire's smile flickered. Nathan frowned. "What does that mean?" I folded my hands in my lap. "It means what you've been given is useless," Mr. Mathers added. "The Graves estate, at the time of Mr. Graves's death, did not directly control any of the key properties these assets rely on." Nathan looked like someone had punched him in the stomach. I stood slowly and walked to the center of the table. "You want the truth? Your inheritance isn't gone. It never existed. It was paper. Shells. You were counting on owning buildings that are already mine. You were promised an empire that your father had already sold to pay for your mistakes." "Why would he do that?" Claire whispered. "Why wouldn't he tell us?" "Because he was ashamed." I said, "Because he didn't want to admit he'd bet on the wrong heirs." Nathan's voice cracked as he tried to hold composure. This can't be the end." "Oh no," I said with a quiet finality. "This is just the beginning." Claire pushed back from the table. "So what now? You get everything. The art, the homes, the company." I turned to her. "I don't need the company. I already have what matters." Nathan hissed. "Then why are you here?" I met his eyes. "To make sure you know what happened. To look you both in the face. And show you the cost of shutting someone out just because they didn't play by your rules." Mr. Mathers continued reading the will. There were small personal notes, gifts, and apologies from my father to old friends, caretakers, even his housekeeper. But by then, the only sound in the room was the steady rhythm of Nathan's breathing, heavy with realization. And Claire. She was no longer looking at the lawyer. She was looking at me. The sister she thought had vanished. The sister who now owned everything. The tension in the conference room had shifted. No longer the fiery rage Nathan carried in his clenched fists or the disbelief that clouded Claire's face. It was something more dangerous now. Recognition. The realization that the story of the Graves legacy, which they had believed themselves to be the protagonists of, had a missing chapter, and I was the author of it. Mr. Mathers continued reading the final administrative clauses of the will. I half listened, my eyes tracing the grain of the table. I'd memorized every line of this moment months ago, and yet, when it finally arrived, the reality still had weight. To my daughter, Jillian, I leave the remaining assets under my personal name, including the Graves Manor estate, my personal art collection, and this letter. Mr. Mathers gently slid a cream envelope across the table. My name was written on it in Dad's handwriting, careful, slanted, and all capital letters, as if he still couldn't let go of control, even in script. I took the letter silently. Nathan looked like he'd been hit by a truck. Claire stared at the envelope like it had claws. "You knew," she whispered. "You knew you were getting that." "No," I replied, but I knew he didn't hate me anymore. Her mouth twisted, confused. "Then, why didn't you say anything? Why let us walk in here like fools?" I looked at her, not with cruelty, but clarity. "Because you didn't ask. Not once." She fell silent, her defenses cracking like thin ice. I turned the envelope over in my hands, weighing it like it carried the grief I hadn't allowed myself to feel. Because the truth was I missed my father, even if I spent years trying not to. Even if he made me earn every last shred of his respect. 3 weeks before he died, he called me. I was in the middle of a negotiation for a medical complex deal in Raleigh. My assistant passed me the call. Eyes wide. "Your father is online too." I thought it was a prank, or an accident, or worse, some trick. But when I answered, it was his voice. Older, slower, but still deliberate. "Jillian," he said. "Hello, Dad?" A pause, as if he was choosing whether to hang up or not. "Then I've been reviewing some market records. I waited. I know who you are," he said finally. "I know what you've built." My heart stopped. "Then you know I didn't need your name to do it." Another pause. Then, the words I had dreamed of hearing since I was 20. "You were right. I was wrong. I didn't cry. I didn't even speak. I let the silence speak for me. Let him sit in it." And then he said, "I always thought legacy was about bloodlines. Turns out, it's about vision." That was our last real conversation. He died 12 days later. Now, seated in the same room as the siblings who had laughed when I was cut off, I felt not triumphant, not vindicated, just calm. "It was over. I would have taken you with me," I said suddenly, not really sure who I was addressing. "I didn't want to build this alone." Claire flinched. Nathan scoffed. "Don't pretend this was noble. It wasn't," I said. "It was necessary." Claire's voice cracked. "You could have warned me, told me what was happening. I didn't know Dad was selling anything. I didn't know he was struggling." "Did you ever ask?" I said, softer this time. She blinked. That hit harder than I thought it would. Nathan slammed his hand against the table. "So what now? You just take everything and rub our faces in it. What's your endgame?" "Jillian." I stood. "I already won. I don't need revenge. What I need, what I want, is for you to understand that the empire you thought you were protecting was already gone." He shook his head. "You've changed." "No," I said. "You never looked closely enough to see who I really was." Claire finally stood too. "So what do we do now?" I looked at her, and for the first time in years, I saw my sister not the socialite, not the polished heiress, but a confused, tired woman who was suddenly unmoored. "You rebuild," I said. "You start fresh. Not off Dad's money, not off illusions, but off something real, if you want it." Nathan muttered something under his breath. Mr. Mathers closed the folder and adjusted his papers. "I believe that concludes the formal reading. Unless Miss Graves has further matters to present." "I do," I said, "but not legal ones." Nathan rolled his eyes. I ignored him. I placed a small stack of offer letters on the table. Claire raised an eyebrow. "What's that, entry-level training contracts?" I said. "For both of you, at Crescent Oak?" "You're joking," Nathan said. "I'm not. You want to learn how to manage what you never bothered to understand. Now's your chance." He pushed his chair back and stood. "Not a damn chance," I figured. I said. Claire didn't move. She stared at the folder like it was radioactive. "I'll think about it," she murmured. Nathan scoffed again. "Don't you dare." But Claire was already reaching for the offer letter. I tucked the envelope from Dad into my purse and headed toward the door. Just before I left, I turned back. "To be clear," I said, "this isn't charity, this is structure. The same structure I built while you were too busy enjoying the illusion of power." Claire looked down. Nathan was already halfway out the opposite door. And for the first time in years, I felt light. I didn't need them to say sorry. I didn't need to win. I just needed to walk out knowing that the person they erased had returned stronger than ever and that the legacy Dad left me wasn't a check. It was the clarity to never need one. I stepped out of the conference room, leaving behind polished mahogany, stunned silence, and the lingering scent of old money cracking apart. The hallway outside the law office was quiet, save for the soft hum of recessed lighting and the rhythmic clack of my heels. As the elevator doors slid open, I felt the envelope in my purse brush against my side. The letter? Still unread. But I couldn't afford nostalgia just yet. The real work was about to begin. 1 hour later, I walked into Crescent Oak Capital's true headquarters, not the tiny downtown office everyone thought we operated from, but the 22nd floor of a glass-paneled tower 5 blocks away. Our name wasn't on the building. Deliberately. Power moves better in silence. Ms. Graves, my executive assistant, Leo, greeted me at the entrance. "The legal teams are waiting in Conference B. We've also received confirmation from the management companies every single contract will lapse by the end of the quarter." "Perfect," I said. "Let's make it public." He blinked. "Everything." "Yes," I said. "It's time they understand what just happened." Within 2 hours, a carefully worded press release went live. Crescent Oak Capital announces majority acquisition and ownership of 12 former Graves Holdings properties, including Westmont Tower, the Eastern Ridge Complex, and the original Graves Plaza. All properties now fall under the direct management of Crescent Oak and its subsidiaries. Effective immediately. Former Graves management companies will be subject to contract renegotiations. All current leases remain unaffected. It wasn't vengeance. It was transparency. By 4:00 p.m., Nathan had called me 4 times. I didn't pick up. Instead, I watched as social media threads exploded. "What happened to Graves Holdings Crescent Oak? Who even are they? Wait, is Jillian Graves the CEO?" A news site called my assistant for a quote. Leo simply said, "Ms. Graves is unavailable. She's reviewing performance reports." I was specifically the numbers Graves Holdings had once bragged about now feeding my balance sheet. Rental returns? Multi-use revenue from converted commercial space? The ROI on the South Marina redevelopment they had once rejected as too risky. Every number they used to dismiss me with now worked for me. At 6:30 p.m., Claire showed up. Not a call, not a warning. She walked through the glass doors, heels tapping with less certainty than usual, eyes scanning the clean, minimalist lobby. She was still dressed from the reading, though the confidence had faded from her shoulders. Leo looked at me, questioning. I nodded. She entered my office slowly, like someone approaching the edge of a frozen lake. "Nice space," she said finally, looking around. "Thanks," I replied. "Built it from scratch." "I can see that." She hesitated. I read the offer. I waited. "I'm not ready," she added. "But I don't want to go back to Nathan's plan either." "That's fair," I said. "You don't have to decide today. The door's open for now." Claire sat down in the chair opposite mine. For a moment, we didn't speak. Just 2 women, born into the same storm, who'd chosen very different ways to weather it. She broke the silence. "Why didn't you ever fight back?" "I did," I said. "Just not the way you expected." Meanwhile, outside these walls, the collapse had begun. Nathan, ever the bulldozer, tried to call our shared business contacts, but without the assets, his name didn't carry weight. Property managers started pulling contracts. Developers ghosted him. Even the Graves brand licensing Claire had inherited began losing value. It was hard to license a name that had lost its grip on everything it once stood for. And still, I kept my focus forward. I met with lawyers, cleaned up transitions, briefed property teams, reviewed offers from other investment groups wanting in now that the Graves name had been dethroned. It wasn't just about empire anymore. It was about rebuilding mine with structure, discipline, and vision. That night, I finally sat alone in my office and opened Dad's letter. Jillian, I was proud long before I called you. I just didn't know how to say it without losing the part of me that believed legacy had to be passed down, not earned. You changed that. You showed me legacy is built, not granted. I'm sorry for what I let them do, for what I said, for what I didn't say. But most of all, I'm glad you didn't need my permission to become everything you are. You taught me something no building ever did. Love, Dad. I didn't cry, not right away, but eventually, I let a few tears fall. Not for him, not even for the past, but for the girl who had once stood outside this world. Fists clenched, heart aching, wondering if she'd ever be allowed to matter. By midnight, I had already moved to the next phase, restructuring Graves's remaining shell company into a non-profit educational fund, one that would provide real estate education to underrepresented women in finance. Graves Holdings wouldn't vanish. It would evolve, just like I did. Nathan showed up 2 days later, not at the office, not with a lawyer, at my apartment. He was waiting outside the lobby, tall, arms crossed, sunglasses shielding a face that was far too still. I didn't need Leo or security to tell me he was there. I could feel it, like a storm cell waiting for its cue. I stood across from him for a moment, letting the air stretch between us. "Didn't think you'd come," I said. He removed his sunglasses. His eyes were red, from lack of sleep. Maybe, or something else. "Can we talk?" he asked. I hesitated, then nodded. We sat in the private lounge upstairs, surrounded by glass walls and late afternoon sun. He didn't look at the skyline. He looked at me. "I hated you for leaving the company," he said. I leaned back. "I know, no," he said. "I mean, I really hated you. Not because you disappointed Dad, because you walked away from something I've been trying to live up to my entire life." I blinked. I didn't even like real estate. He admitted, surprising both of us. But it was the only language Dad spoke, so I learned it, mastered it, let it define me, because I thought that was the only way to earn his respect. He looked down. "And then you built something better. Without him." I said nothing. Let the silence do its work. "You know what the worst part is," he continued. "When I first heard about Crescent Oak, I laughed. I thought, typical Jillian, playing at startups like it's Monopoly." He looked at me now. But it wasn't a game. It was checkmate. I just didn't see the board. I crossed my arms. "Why are you here, Nathan?" "To ask if you'll destroy us?" I raised an eyebrow. "Is that what you think I'm doing?" He gave a dry laugh. "Come on, you're holding every contract we need to survive. Our investors are panicking, developers are backing out, even the Graves brand is in free fall. You could finish us in one press release. I could." I agreed. Silence. "But I won't." He looked at me, startled. "I didn't come back for revenge." I said, "I came back to reclaim what I was told I never deserved. Now that I have it, the question isn't whether I'll destroy you, it's whether you'll do it to yourselves." He let out a long, tired breath. "I don't know who I am without the company," he said quietly. And for the first time, I saw him not the cocky heir, not the arrogant brother, but the boy who had spent his life trying to be enough for a man who measured worth in square footage and profit margins. "I do?" I said. "You're someone who's still standing, even after the illusion broke." He chuckled bitterly. "Doesn't feel like standing." Then start with crawling, I offered. But start. He pulled something from his coat, a manila envelope. I found these, he said, handing it to me. Letters. From Dad. To you. Unsent. I froze. You kept these? He shrugged. Claire found them in his study. After the funeral. She didn't know what to do. I said, "You should have them." I opened the envelope slowly. Inside were 3 folded letters, dated over the past 2 years. One was just after my acquisition of Westmont, another after I made Forbes's 30 Under 30. The third was dated just weeks before he died. I didn't read them. Not yet. "Thank you," I said softly. Nathan stood. "I'm not ready to work for you. I didn't expect you to be. But I do want to learn how you did it, how you built it." I paused. That offer still stands, but the titles don't. No corner office, no fancy nameplate. Understood. He turned to leave, then stopped. "One more thing," he said, without turning back. "I'm sorry." I closed my eyes. That word had never come easy in our family. It didn't erase the past, but it acknowledged it. That night, I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine and the city glittering beneath me. A city my companies now helped shape. A legacy no longer borrowed. I opened the first letter. "Jillian, I watched your interview today. You were poised, precise, brilliant. You reminded me of your mother. I don't know when I stopped believing you were one of us. Maybe when you started speaking a language I didn't understand. Maybe because I was afraid you'd outgrow me. You did. And I'm proud of you for it." Tears came this time. Not in anger, not in grief, but in release. The Graves name wasn't just mine now. It was something new, something earned, something redefined. I didn't need them to give me a seat at the table anymore. I was the table. And maybe, just maybe, we could all finally learn to sit at it together. Monday morning, 900 a.m. 3 days after the will reading, every seat in the Crescent Oak boardroom was taken legal teams, communications officers, senior strategists, even the old head of operations from what was once Graves Holdings. The tension was thick with anticipation and something else, curiosity. Today, we weren't just consolidating properties or reassigning contracts, we were making it official. "Is she really doing it?" one of the junior associates whispered as I entered the room. Yes, I was. I took my seat at the head of the table, back straight, voice steady. The skyline blazed behind me like steel and fire. "Let's begin," I said. "First order of business, dissolving the Graves Management Corporation, not merging it, not preserving it as a shell, not keeping the name out of nostalgia. No, we were ending it." The board unanimously approved the motion, the paperwork already in motion with the Secretary of State. The name that once loomed over half the city was now a chapter closed, filed and stamped. Second full integration of the newly acquired properties under the Crescent Oak portfolio. New names, new management systems, new strategy. It wasn't just a corporate restructure. It was a resurrection. As the final documents were signed, a PR team rolled out the prepared statement to the media. Crescent Oak Capital officially acquires and integrates 12 key properties previously owned by Graves Holdings. Effective immediately. All assets and operations will fall under a new holding group, Graves Reimagined. This marks a shift from inherited legacy to earned innovation, said CEO Jillian Graves. "We are not erasing the past, we are rebuilding it on stronger foundations." Within minutes, the headlines rolled in. The forgotten Graves daughter dismantles her family's empire and rebuilds it her way. From heiress to architect, Jillian Graves is the future of urban development. No nepotism here. How one woman quietly took over a $1 billion portfolio. The final headline that made me pause: her father tried to cut her out. Now she owns everything he built. I stared at it for a long time. Not because it hurt, because it was true. Nathan showed up just after lunch, this time at the office. He didn't storm in. He waited outside until Leo waved me down. "He's quieter today," Leo said, half grinning. I stepped out to meet him. "Can I see it?" he asked. "See what the name? The new Graves?" I led him through the newly rebranded East Wing, once Graves Plaza. Now Graves reimagined headquarters. Clean steel signs, modern typography, new mission statement on the wall. Legacy isn't what you inherit, it's what you build despite them. Nathan exhaled slowly. "It's different. Intentionally," I said. He looked around. "People think you did this to humiliate us. Did I?" He shook his head. "No, you did it to free yourself. We just got caught in the wake." For once, there was no bitterness in his voice. Just reality. That evening, we hosted the first stakeholder briefing under the new brand. Investors, tenants, city officials, journalists. Even a few former Graves Holdings board members now stripped of titles, but still clinging to curiosity. The event space was simple but elegant. No velvet ropes, no champagne fountains, just structure, light, and vision. I stepped onto the stage without notes. I wasn't supposed to be here, I said. A ripple of murmurs. I was the daughter who didn't follow the plan, who didn't inherit the boardroom, who didn't marry into alliances or run ribbon cuttings. I was erased from the story before I even wrote my first page. Pause. But while they were writing their ending, I was building my beginning, quietly, brick by brick. I let the words sink in. "This isn't about revenge, it's about revision, applause, but quiet, respectful, the kind that says we hear you now." I stepped off the stage and locked eyes with Claire, sitting in the second row. She didn't clap, but she stood up, and that said more than any ovation ever could. Back in my office. Hours later. I watched the footage of the speech, not for vanity, for verification. I needed to see it with my own eyes the moment I stepped out of the shadow of my last name, not to deny it, but to redefine it. The Graves name now belonged to me, not because of blood, not because of birth order, but because I earned it, and I would never let it be weaponized again. That night, as I walked alone through the marble lobby of Graves Reimagined, I passed the old portrait wall, the final relic, photos of my father, my grandfather, and even the original land deed that started it all in 1912. Next to it was a blank frame. Leo had left it for me. "Future leaders," he said with a wink. I stood in front of it for a long time, then took out a photo from my bag, the only one I'd kept from my childhood, me at age 8. Standing on a construction site beside my father. Hard hat too big. Boots unlaced. Smile huge. I slid it into the frame. Legacy isn't what you inherit. It's what you choose to carry and what you dare to change. 2 weeks passed. The headlines cooled. The contracts settled. The city began to adjust to a new name on its skyline. But the quiet was the hardest part. Not the kind that comes from peace, the kind that hums with questions still unanswered, emotions still unspoken, wounds too fresh to scab over, too familiar to ignore. Nathan hadn't called since the rebranding. Claire sent a brief email. One line: "I've decided to join the leadership training program." No emojis, no warmth, but it was something. And Dad's letters, I kept them in my drawer. Read them twice, then once more. Then stopped, not because they didn't matter, but because I was afraid of memorizing them. If I did, I'd start rewriting the past in my head and I'd work too hard to make peace with what actually happened. That Friday, I visited Graves Manor, not as an heir, as its new owner. It had been quiet since the funeral. The housekeeper, Mrs. Reed, had stayed on, tending to the place like it was still alive. She greeted me at the door with watery eyes and a hesitant hug. "You look just like your mother today," she said. I didn't know what to say. so I smiled. The rooms felt smaller than I remembered, or maybe I had grown too much to fit inside them. I stopped in Dad's old study. The desk was still cluttered, papers left in their final state as if he might walk in any minute and pick up where he left off. One item stood out, a photograph of the three of us, Nathan, Claire, and me, at a groundbreaking ceremony in '97. Back when we were just kids in plastic helmets, all trying to hold the same golden shovel. Claire's hand clutched the handle. Nathan grinned for the camera. And I was looking at the ground. Like I knew I was holding something heavier than it looked. I wandered into the greenhouse out back. It had always been my mother's favorite place before she passed. I remembered sneaking out there at night as a child, lying on the stone bench beneath the glass ceiling, counting stars. To my surprise, the plants were still alive. Overgrown, yes, but alive, wild, untamed, beautiful in their resilience. I sat on the bench and let myself feel it all. Grief, not just for my father, but for the years I lost chasing approval, for the conversations never had, for the sisterhood that dissolved into silence, for the version of me that might have existed if things had been different. But grief is tricky. It demands to be felt, then dares you to keep going anyway. And I would. That evening, I invited Claire to meet me there. She arrived wearing flats and a soft gray cardigan, no power heels, no polished smile, just Claire. Not the brand ambassador, not the Graves darling, just a woman unsure where she stood now. She looked around the greenhouse. I forgot how peaceful this place is. Mom used to call it her sanctuary. I said the city noise couldn't reach her here. Claire walked slowly toward the vines wrapping the back wall. I remember thinking you didn't belong at those board meetings. I stayed silent. Now I wonder if I ever belonged either. She added. I turned to her. You belonged. You just never got to define what that meant. She nodded, eyes downcast. I joined the leadership program, not because I want to impress anyone, but because I need to learn how to build something. For real, from the ground up. That's the only way anything ever lasts. I said. We sat in silence. After a while, she asked, Do you ever miss him? Yes, I said without hesitation, but I don't miss who he wanted me to be. Claire swallowed. I think I spent so long becoming who he needed. I forgot who I was without him. That's why it hurts now. I said, because there's space again. And space is terrifying when you don't know what to grow in it. She looked at me. Can we start over? She asked, voice barely a whisper. I reached over, took her hand. We can start. I don't know if it'll ever be over. She smiled. Just a little. That was enough. The next day, I received a text from Nathan. Lunch, no titles, no pitches, just us. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I closed my laptop, stepped out onto the balcony of my office, and looked out at the buildings, my buildings stretching across the skyline. Power is quiet. I'd learned, but healing is quieter. You don't notice it when it begins, only when, one day, the silence no longer feels heavy. When the air doesn't sting, when your past stops screaming, and your present starts whispering something softer. Later that week, I returned to the old portrait wall in the Graves reimagined wing. Someone, maybe Leo, had added a new frame beside mine. Not a photo, just a quote, engraved in brushed steel. It takes more courage to rewrite your story than to finish someone else's. Underneath J. G. I stared at it for a long time, not out of pride, out of peace. 6 months later, the Graves name was still on the skyline, but it didn't mean what it used to. It wasn't a monument to inherited wealth anymore. It wasn't a whisper of old money or an echo of closed boardrooms. It was something else now, something rebuilt, reimagined, redefined, and for the first time in my life, When I heard the name Graves, I didn't flinch. I stood a little taller. Crescent Oak's expansion continued now with the new Graves Fellowship attached to its name, a real estate mentorship initiative for young women from underrepresented backgrounds. The first class of 20 was already in training, shadowing project leads, sitting in on development meetings, learning how to build from the blueprint up. I met them every Thursday afternoon, no cameras, no press releases. Just a room full of ambition and questions no one had let them ask before. "Do you ever get scared?" one of them asked me once. "Every day," I replied, "but fear means you're about to build something new." Nathan eventually took a role in a sustainability startup, something outside the shadow of our father. Finally, he sent me updates from time to time. He still didn't say much, but sometimes silence holds more truth than speeches ever can. Claire completed the training program, then surprised everyone, including herself, by becoming one of Crescent Oak's community development officers. She'd found her rhythm. Not in power plays or ribbon cuttings, but in rebuilding neighborhoods from the ground up. She said once, during coffee, "I used to think legacy was about being seen." I smiled. Now I think it's about making others feel like they matter. I nodded. She was learning fast. One crisp October morning, I walked through the Graves reimagined plaza for the last time under that name, because today it would become something else. I stepped onto the stage in front of city officials, reporters, and team members. Behind me, a draped sign waited to be unveiled. 6 years ago, I began. I stood outside this building with a resume no one cared to read. I was the daughter no one invited, the name no one respected. I didn't want revenge. I wanted recognition not for who I was related to, but for what I was capable of. The crowd was silent, listening. Today, I don't need that recognition anymore, because I have something better. Pause. Impact. I turned and pulled the cord. The curtain fell away. The new sign read, "Foundry Collective." A murmur rippled through the crowd. I smiled. The Graves story ended in this building. But Foundry begins here, a place where legacies aren't inherited. They're forged. The applause was different this time. Not polite, not performative, but earned. That night, I stood alone on the rooftop. The wind was soft. The city buzzed below, alive with thousands of people, each building something of their own. Not all of them would inherit towers, but some of them would rise higher than anyone expected, because they dared to begin without permission. Just like I did, I pulled out the last letter from Dad, the one I hadn't opened yet. "Jillian, if you're reading this, then you've already done it. You built something I could never understand, because I built from fear. You built from faith in yourself. That takes more courage than I ever had." I wish I'd told you sooner how proud I was, but part of me thinks you didn't need it. You didn't need me to crown you. You made your own throne, and I'm honored to have been proven wrong. Dad. I smiled, not with bitterness, with release. There are two kinds of inheritance in this world, the kind they give you and the kind you claim. I didn't just reclaim my place in the family. I reshaped the family itself, not in name, but in legacy, not in power, but in purpose. And I wasn't done yet, because for every door I'd once been shut out of, I now held the keys. But more importantly, I'd learned which ones were worth opening, and which ones I'd rather leave behind.